Hi guys, thank you for coming. My name is Keeling, and like I said, I live here in Las Vegas. I work at the Fremont Street Experience. I do creative content and promotional materials for the Canopy screen that covers the street in Fremont Street in Vegas. So we're a pretty small team. There's only 2 of us right now, so it's important for us to do a lot of different tasks and wear a lot of different hats and pretty much see projects from conception to completion. So Maxon 1 and Cinema 4D make it really easy to kind of jump into any project and kind of get the ball rolling and see the entire project all the way through. So the Canopy screen is a very unique screen. It's over 15,000 pixels long on its longest edge. So it's basically like if you took a HD 1920 by 1080 and then stacked 7 of them horizontally. There's a lot of unique aspects to the screen. It's very large, it's curved, and it's overhead. The screen has 2 bottoms and no top edge. So you have to be very careful about when things get too close to the top, they're going to look upside down on the street. So with that said, I'm going to just show you guys my reel. You can kind of get a sense of the types of designs we make for Fremont Street. Thank you. So being that the screen is very, very long and large, it's oftentimes hard to render out an image that's that size, let alone an entire animation. So there's a few tricks that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to go through a project that I made for our Luau Wow event, which is a Hawaiian-themed luau event that's going to be taking place in October. And I'll just show you guys a few things that I do to kind of mitigate that render time. So a few things would be like rendering out the background separately and the foreground elements and compositing them in After Effects. And what I also like to do is break the canopy into 4 sections and then kind of mask them together in After Effects so that you don't see the seams. So for this project, I wanted to take the rainforest floor of Hawaii and put it up overhead above the street. So I really wanted to make these bright, beautiful colored hibiscus flowers that grow and bloom and open on the street. What's really cool about Fremont is that when the screen changes color, the entire street changes color. So it's really effective to have really bright, high saturated, high contrast images. So to begin this project, I started in ZBrush. And I basically started with a plane. And then moving on, I basically take a Z remodeler tool. And by using this, I can basically rough out the general shape of a flower petal. And then from there, once I have the 2D shape roughed out, I start putting in these curves and generally just roughing out basically the basic shape of it. So I gradually increase the subdivisions on the flower petal, and I wanted it to have this kind of really nice delicate feeling. So I added a bit of thickness to it, but not too much. I just want to be able to have some edge there. And from here, I in order to create this, I use a lot of like the clay buildup and the clay brushes. It's kind of the standard sculpting brushes. And just come in here and I start to add detail. And then also a good one for this that I found was the cloth move tool, which by doing this, kind of able to get some of these nice wrinkles that you'd see on a flower petal, like a really nice, delicate, kind of fleshy flower petal. From there, I shape out some of those specific details. So making the edges of the flower petals a little bit more random and interesting looking. And I also use, let's see, a good one was the crumple tool. Right there. So I like this one too. Just turn up the intensity of it. Just by doing that, kind of you can see it starts to like amplify some of those details. So from there, I ended up doing a lot of the poly painting, which I essentially I blocked in some color, and then there's a lot of back and forth, like blocking in color, blending it together, adding detail, blending out that detail, adding more detail, kind of the same basic premise of sculpting. And what's really nice with the tools in here is you can kind of do both at the same time. So if I grab let's do standard brush, make it real small, and then I do mRGB. Let's grab a color. I can create lines and paint on them at the same time. Might have to increase my geometry here so you can actually see what I'm doing. So I'll hit this Go Z button. Don't show again. So this will automatically bring everything into Cinema for me. You can see we have it right there. And this is really cool. So it basically sets everything up for me. And I have my material, and it already creates it. And that's because I've gone down here and really easy to use UV mapping options. So UV mapping is a really difficult process. It takes a long time to kind of master unwrapping objects. Planes are pretty easy because you just kind of flatten them out like a sheet. But if it's anything more complex with extrusions and details, you got to kind of flatten everything out as if it were like a mask that you put over it. So ZBrush makes it really easy to unwrap UVs. And from there, I can take my texture map that I painted directly onto the flower petal, and that's going to automatically lay it out exactly where I need it on the model itself. So I create my texture map, I create my displacement map, and I also create a normal map. And what that's going to do is when I bring that into Cinema, it's going to bring it in as a low poly object, but because I added all this detail in ZBrush, it's going to use that as a displacement map to kind of bump everything out and give it that detail I'm looking for. So let me just show you. So this is how it came in, just the default standard Cinema 4D. But I actually want this to be a redshift material. So in order to do that, I have to just change my renderer to redshift. And that's all I have to do. And now check this out. I'll hit Go Z again. Did its thing. Now, it made a redshift material for me. So it hooked everything up. Usually with any other kind of 3D painting programs, you'd have to export all the maps and then figure out kind of where to plug them into the redshift material. This does it all for me. So it's super easy. You can do it right, do it on the fly. You know, there's a few things you'll probably want to change and adjust, but it gets you started and it gets you a long way there. So I did end up making a few changes to this model. Let me just solo my flower petal off. So one thing I did end up doing is, this is basically the same as it was when it brought it in for me. The only extra thing I ended up doing was plugging my diffuse color into my subsurface node. And what that does is it gives it kind of like that nice fleshy look. And I just increased my subsurface up to 0.7. And then I told it that it was thin-walled. So you get kind of that backlit material look. When you look at a really glossy flower petal, you can see the light kind of coming through it. And that's the look I was going for. So I did that. Another thing I did is I also created a couple extra colors because I wanted a nice variety in my final product. But let me talk to you about how I built this. So we have one flower petal. Basically, I just okay. So I put them into a cloner. So a hibiscus flower has 5 petals. So I made a radial cloner and I gave it a count of 5. And I just have this radius here keyframed just slightly so that when it closes, it kind of comes in on itself. And then when it opens, it blooms like that. And then I added a couple MoGraph objects. So first one I have here is the plane effector. And what this one's doing is this one's basically controlling the entire bloom. So I play through like that. Kind of how I start these projects is I'll create the look I want it to end up being, and then I kind of reverse engineer it back into itself. So if you imagine a flower blooming, I'm kind of like taking it from the bloom state and bringing it back into the bud. So that's what this plane effector is doing. I have my parameters here. So, oops. So I am keyframing the rotation and the scale. So you can see that it rotates up and out slightly, and it scales from 0 to 1. Cool. And then the next thing I do is I add a delay modifier or delay MoGraph object. And in my parameter here, I'm just going to affect the rotation of it. And I'm going to set it to spring. So what this does is when I hit play, and we have it growing on, it gives it that nice bounce. So it's a little more organic looking. It looks a little less robotic and like an animate, like a 3D animation. So, and then from there, I just add a little bit of random. So that way we get a unique size and shape to each of the flowers. So again, they're not uniform. It doesn't look as fake. And then the random, I just did a simple strength keyframe here. Because when we have it in this state, we basically don't want it to be random until it's grown. Okay, and then this looks good, but it's not quite right yet. So I added a bend deformer to the petals. I don't know if you can see what this is doing. So we just have it bending a bit more. And also, this is kind of the cool one, the twist. So now when my flower grows on, it's got this kind of like a twisted, it looks like it's kind of been wrapped up inside of itself. Cool. And then last thing I did here was add this taper, which just gives it a little bit more of a taper. So cool. And then that's just the petals. I went ahead and made the other parts of the flower. And this portion here is called the receptacle, where the flower kind of sits in. And this one's pretty basic, same basic principle. I have a cloner with 5 objects in it. Each one of these is my my leaf. Same thing with the delay. Set it to spring so that when it animates on, gives a little bit of a decay. And then I added a couple bends to this just to give it the shape. Nothing too fancy. And then again, a random, just to give it a little bit more life. So that one was pretty straightforward. Same basic principle. The pistil, so this portion of the flower, did end up giving me a lot of trouble in the beginning. So it was kind of a tricky one to work out. So from here, I start with a most spline. I'm going to turn the rest of these off. Oops. Let me not do that. Okay. All right. So this most spline, it's a simple most spline. So basically all I've done here is I've adjusted the length and the width to where I want them. And then under width, I just using the spline, kind of give it this curve, this taper that I want. And I can adjust this into any shape along the spline. And then I also keyframe the length of it so that once the flower blooms, it grows up. And I also keyframed a little bit of bend and a little bit of twist. So just kind of give it a little bit of flair as it's growing. And then we move on to the stigmas, which I just modeled this basic piece of geometry. I think I just made a sphere, extruded out the bottom, and beat it up a little bit, sculpted it a little bit so it looked a little bit organic. So those ones I put into a radial cloner. And with this plane effector, I just kind of separated them from the bottom and stuck them to the top of the most spline using my line spline tag. So I basically just, from the tags menu, animation tags. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, animation tags, line to spline. And then I just throw my most spline into my spline path and tell it position 100. So it's right at the top. And then this was the tricky part. I have my stamen, which are the little kind of fuzzies that come off of it. Same thing, just a simple piece of geometry. Close these up. Okay, and I put them into a cloner. Now, the tricky part with this is I wanted to animate them growing on the flower. So we have the style that grows up like that, and then all of the stigma kind of come out from it. Because I wanted to have them animated, I was struggling with not having them jitter. So basically, as the style would move, they would jitter across it. So I found a little workaround to get what I want. And I have my cloner object here, but this one's not a radial cloner. It's an object cloner. And it's actually referencing a copy of the most spline I made, not the actual most spline. because of some geometry issues I was having. So that was kind of my workaround for that, which we don't even need this on. You won't ever even see it, but it's just there. It kind of just lives as a placeholder. So this does not look correct. What we need to do is randomize them. So I'm basically just randomizing the position of them and the rotation and a little bit of the scale as well. And then I don't want them to grow on the entire length of this. I want to limit that. So I created a plane effector with a linear field. And it's kind of what that looks like. So basically my plane effector is telling it based on the linear field, so based on wherever this is in the world, it's telling it to scale, go from 1% scale to negative 1% scale. So I guess a better illustration would be if I were to open this up entirely. You can see that this edge is where we have anything beyond this edge is going to be 100%, a scale of 1. And then anything below this line is going to be a scale of -1, and it just kind of maps the value between these two planes. But I want a harsh cutoff, so I stick them together like that. And so now what this looks like when I give it a go, it growing. And now they're all stuck to the object. They're not jittering around all over it. So this is good. This is what I wanted. Okay. So now that that's made, a couple of the other things I did was just keyframe some scale so that in this state, there's nothing there. So I go from 100% scale to 0. And because I did that, scaling between 3D programs, and especially if you have a arbitrary, like if you're building kind of things in a kind of an arbitrary scale, I could bring my flower into my other scene, and it's probably gonna be way too big, right? And because I keyframed a lot of the scale parameters in here, it's going to kind of mess with that. So what I wanted to do, I'm happy with this how it is. I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to break anything. So I exported everything as a proxy file. And what's cool about that is I can just go into my other scene here and import my proxy. And then this lives on my computer outside of the project file. So I can reference different proxy files. I can bring in... I made a few other colors of these hibiscus flowers, so I can bring in those ones, make changes, and then I can have kind of a variety of them using just the one project, but then exporting everything separately. So, brought that in here, and basically want to create the growth of the plant itself. And I did that using X particles. So what we have here, let me turn some of these off. So I have an emitter, and basically all it's doing is it's 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. It's pointing upward, and it's just going to emit one particle. And this particle is just going to go straight up in the air. But we want it to grow like a plant, so we give it, we feed it this branch modifier. And what this does is this is going to tell it how far to grow and how far, basically the max distance and the minimum distance of how much it's going to grow. So it varies every single time you play it. It's like a random simulation, but this is just kind of the parameter. So anywhere between 300 and 450 centimeters. And this is telling it how often to bend every 10 frames with a variation of 5 frames. So that's 5 to 15 frames with the maximum angle of 5 degrees. So that's what this looks like. Oh, and one thing, you can't this does nothing for us, right? So what we need to do is we actually need to put a trail on here so we can actually see where it's going. All right, cool. So now that we see it, there's more of a organic growth, and this isn't going to go on forever. It stops based on the parameters I told it in here, but we just have one branch, so we have to make a couple more. So in my XP branch, I go to the branching tab, and this is what controls the next branches that grow. So every 5 frames will generate a new branch, the variation of 1 frame. And here we're telling it to make 2 branches or 3 branches. So 2 branches, 3 max branches. So basically what that means, it's going to try to generate 6 branches. So it's going to try 3 times to generate 2 branches, and I'll show you what that looks like. Oh. There we go. And now you can see my main branch has this green particle, and my sub branches have these blue particles. And I'll tell you why I did that in a second. But basically every sub branch of this XP branch modifier does the same thing. It just creates more branches. So I'll turn them all on for you. And you can see we have this giant orange particles, and then these little ones have the tiny purple particles. And the reason why they're different colors is because I assigned each branch group a group. And I did that because I wanted to limit where it was growing which generator. So by that I mean I have a few different leaves and then my hibiscus flower. Now these generate on the ends of each branch. And so basically I told it to generate my flowers only on the branch group, and then the second, the base group, which is the green one, that's our 1 particle, our branch group, which is our blue particles, and then I told the leaves to branch on all the other ones, so the purple and the orange. And that is what this looks like. Struggling. Because I also have, there we go, a lot faster. So now you'll see, once they get to their desired length, my flowers bloom off the end of them, and my leaves grow. Now the last thing I need to do is add a spline mesher. So this is basically just going to give the actual splines some geometry here. So without it, they're just splines. If I render this right now, you're not going to see anything. But now I have some geometry I can put a material on. So let's take a look at this. There we go. And the only other thing I did here was I threw in a redshift dome light, and I just put a HDRI map in it. I adjusted the intensity and exposure, and I also increased the gamma a little bit, and that just kind of, I did that because I wanted it to kind of have a sun, like a really early morning, like high saturated sun look. And then just adjusting the gamma gave me the look I wanted. From here, I will talk about how I created the background for this. And I think this is probably the most interesting part in terms of building stuff out for the canopy. I have this terrain, and basically what I did was I separated it in 4 sections. I have section 1 and section 2. And I just set these up in takes. Basically what takes are is they, you can assign different render settings, and object settings within the same scene. So if you have something similar, if you're doing like product mock-ups or something and you have different products or different variations of the same product, you can just kind of set them all up there, hit render, and it's super easy. It'll render each one of them with your desired setting. So that's kind of what I did here. I broke it up into 4 parts, and you can see this little, this path going through. They actually sync up to one another. So when I lay them out in After Effects, you can see that they will line up. There we go. So I did this. I rendered out the background separately because really at this resolution, it takes a really long time to render even a few seconds. So I broke it up into separate parts just to save myself some time. That way it's not rendering the background on every single frame. What I did was here we go. Here's where my terrain lives. So that's section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. And then you can kind of see how this take system is working. So when I go from section 3, you see section 3 is on right now, and go to section 4. Takes a second. You'll see that it turned on section 4 and turned off section 3. There we go. Cool. So, I added a lot of my plants here. So I spent some time modeling a variety of different colored plants, different types of plants, and I basically just used cloners. I also used a few matrix scatter objects. Scatter some throughout here. So we have our grasses layer and our rocks layer. And I can show you, it's probably easier to show you those in After Effects because I have everything all broken up already. But basically I just have these kind of scattered on here with cloners, and these are my proxy objects. And let me close that. I am limiting them to only the middle portion of it with this capsule field. So the same thing with the linear field. I'm just telling it, hey, everything inside this capsule is 100%, is at one scale of 1, and everything outside of it falls off to a scale of 0. So we don't have objects on the edges here. You'll notice that I actually have space, and that's just so I can seam them together inside of After Effects. Oh yeah, one thing I did want to mention, and I thought this was super cool. I just figured this out a few weeks ago. But inside, I added a redshift object tag. Basically what that is a compositing tag. And I told it in here. So I rendered out my background separately. And if I were to render out my plants separate from the background, you're basically going to have like little stickers of plants. But it's not going to look realistic because you're not going to see the shadows. But with this redshift object tag, I'm going to matte here, and I can enable shadows. And what that's going to do, and then I can turn off my section 4 so you can't see it. I'm going to go up here to my render view. Cool, we got the plants. If I click this button, it's going to show me the alpha. And I think I will have to go to main. Okay, so switching back to my main take. There we go. So for some reason, it didn't want to show it to me in section 4. But now you can see instead of just having the plants, we're actually getting a lot of these shadows. So basically, this is the alpha channel. Everything in white is 100% opaque. Everything in black is 100% transparent. And now you see we get these kind of cool gray values, and that's what our shadows are going to be. And I'll show you what that looks like in here. So and again, I have 4 different sections, so I have 4 different layers for each part of the terrain that I wanted to render. So now we have our grass layer. You can see that it adds a lot of shadow and definition in here. You can kind of see that if I take these ones away and then just turn the background off. That's what we're seeing there, and that's where our shadows are. Cool. And then same thing with the other layers. I just rendered them out separately because the grass and the rocks aren't moving. So I can just throw those in there. They're fine. But the plants I wanted to render separately because they are animated, and I'm going to be rendering out a lot more frames. So it's just easier. It kind of cuts down on time. It's more manageable that way. And I will show you how that looks. So I just... I used Insidium Tau to generate just a bunch of different types of plants. I modeled some of the petals here as well. Did some kind of custom plants based off of plants you would find in Hawaii. So I, again, wanted to give this a very like Hawaiian jungle look. And I just animated them growing. Cool. And then this is kind of just the backdrop portion of it. From there, I added our Luau logo. So this was made by a colleague of mine, but it is our official Luau logo. And I have my plants growing behind it. And what's really cool is now I can render out my hibiscus flowers separately and just kind of have those in the foreground as a foreground element. Let me actually show you how this looks. So this is our Canopy presentation view that we use to visualize what things are going to look like on the canopy. So up here, you'll have the entire length of the canopy. On this side, it is a small detail. It's usually right here in the middle. And then this side is our street view. You can also see our column screens. So the Fremont Street has the canopy, and it also has 30 column screens that line the street, as well as 3 stage screens for live events. And we do content for all of these screens. So a few fun facts about Fremont Street is that it is 1,375 feet long by 80 feet wide and 65 feet above the street. It has 16,433,152 pixels. It has 5,000 nits of brightness. So what this means is that it can be seen 24 hours a day. We can run it at in the full Vegas sunshine now. Previous versions of the canopy only ran at night because they weren't bright enough to be seen during the day. We also have 52 speaker clusters that line the mall. And this, we can do basically localized audio. So imagine if you were to hear a jet flying past you, we can kind of simulate that sound effect. A few things to consider while creating something. It's not only the size, the scale, the magnitude of it. Obviously, this looks pretty normal on our screens. But when you go out on the street, that could be, the size of one of these hanging booth things overhead. So it's a lot more massive than you'd actually think seeing it on a monitor screen. Also, like I mentioned, it has no top edge. It has 2 bottom edges. So if you remember from my demo reel, some of the text I had on the top here actually looked like it was upside down. But if you were to see it on the street, you'd want it to be right side up this way. So it would appear upside down to us, but on the street, it is the right side up. And the best way to create stunning visuals for the screen is to kind of use that curve and the length of it to your advantage. So good uses of the screen: take advantage of the curve, take advantage of the fact that it's overhead, and kind of, I like to play with that. So I like to take things that you would normally think on the ground, take them up, put them on overhead. And also using the length of the screen. So one of the reasons why I use the take system and kind of blended each background together is because I didn't want repeating tiles down the screen. It's really compelling when you can see the entire length and it's completely unique all the way across, as opposed to something that's tiled and you can kind of tell it's tiled. So with that said, I wanted to show you guys some videos of the, sorry, 1 second, of the screen in action. So took these the other night. We went out and tested our graphics. And this is how it looks on the big screen. And so these were some of the other textures that I created. Basically just took the diffuse texture that I made in ZBrush, brought into Photoshop, did a little bit of color editing, brought that back into Cinema, and then just replaced that one out. Has the same normal maps and displacement maps, but it's just the color that I changed on that one. So a few other visualization things that we use are our missing pixels map. And now this one's really important because the support structures of the canopy actually obstruct some of the artwork. So I'm come in here. I just changed the blend mode to lighten, but you can see these clusters of pink pixels. That's where the support structures are. So something like this, we probably wouldn't want that there. Anything with any kind of messaging, you don't want it to be obstructed because then people can't read it. But stuff like this, just general filler artwork, that's kind of what you want in those areas. So this one, we'd probably have to scoot down a hair. We also utilize a photo op placement map. And what this does, this just kind of tells me, it's a cheat sheet for me, that shows me kind of where to put the important pieces of information. And the reason why they're not like perfectly distanced from each other is because it's actually different things on the street that we kind of want to pay attention to. So this would be, if you could imagine this being Fremont Street, this is 4th Street right here. Down at the end, this is Main Street. So standing here at the end, you want your logo to be up. You want the top of the logo to face this side of the street. So when you're standing there, you'll actually see it the proper way and you can take pictures of it. So I call it a photo op placement. So when we have people come down to take pictures for different promos we're doing or different partnerships we're doing with companies like LVCVA, it's nice to have their logos in specific beautiful spots on Fremont Street. So for instance, what I mean by that is this one right here by number 5. This is going to be right between the Four Queens and the Fremont Casino. So you're going to see those really cool marquees, those old school marquees with the canopy on top. Boom, logo right there in the middle. That's exactly where you want it. So those are kind of the different tools we use to create something of this size and scale. So that is it for me. Thank you all so much for listening to me.